We have to drop this diasporan continental African foolishness, because I can find as many hardcore Africans in Brazil as I can find on the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And I can find weak people in Brazil like I can find weak people on the continent that have been injured by our oppression over the years. Africans are Africans. Yes, we need to discuss what happened. How did our system break down? How did the enemy take so much advantage of us? And that's why I keep telling you, study history. It gets rid of the white man's mystery. Set up new curriculums in the schools of Africa. Teach the truth about what happened. I never go around and say my people stole me into slavery, because I know history. I know who ran the slave trade. I know who had the guns and who didn't have guns. I knew who were the farmers and who was the military arm coming from Europe and the Turkish Ottoman Empire Arab world, who ran the slave trade until the Western Europeans came in the 1400s. So my people have suffered more on the continent than those of us who were sold into slavery have suffered off of the continent, at the hands of the same people. The American English speak with one accent and the British Englishman speak with another accent, but they're the same people. They got the same banking system, the same insurance company, the same investment house. They run the same airlines. They run the same shipping lines. They run the same telecommunication systems. Those are the people who we're up against. Because our leaders won't say all treaties will be abrogated until just treaties are put together for the sake of the future of African people. You don't have to respect any treaty that was signed under duress. You don't have to respect any treaty that is unjust. How can you accept a treaty in Congo with the millions of Congolese people murdered after Leopold? Forget about Leopold. He only killed 25 million of us, and we act like Belgium is our friend. 25 million. The Jews had 6 million killed, and they're still tracking down Nazis today to slit their throats. In one country, we had 25 million, and we scampering to speak French, English, and Belgian as though they have some authority over our minds, speaking the language of our enemies. I'm stuck in their country, born into their language, and just learning to speak little bits of African languages and my Creole, my Pidgin, that we speak here, of our old language. But we've got to be clear. If we really want an African that we want to see, then you've got to look back to go forward. And you got to mean it. Studying history is not an exercise to go around and show people how much you know. Studying history is to give you the ability to come up with a plan for the future, so your children and grandchildren don't have to go through this. So you don't have to leave your beautiful land and come in the snow and the ice of America to practice medicine and make some money. When we have some of the best medical schools in the world, we have some of the best herbalists in the world. We have some of the best herbs in the world for healing the world, right in our beloved Africa. But our politicians don't even know how to take care of our physicians. They don't know how to take care of our school teachers. They don't know how to take care of our policemen. So they don't have to stop me and you on the road and take our little penny just to eat chop for themselves. So we have to say 2022 is going to be different. That we're going to act like Africans. We are the human beings. We are humanity. We're not devils. We have not invaded other people's countries and enslaved them. We have not committed genocide against nobody in Europe or nobody in Asia. We're the human beings. We are true humanity. What is the African system? What is the African way of seeing the world? We got to go back, study our history. Cameroon should not be a fight over the English interest and the French interest or the Islamic interest and the Christian interest. None of those are ours. There's a Cameroon before Christianity comes. There's a Cameroon before the Fulani jihads that led to the Muslim coming. There's a Cameroon before the English speakers or the French speakers. Where is that Cameroon? How did they behave? You know, the Ghana, before the British, before the Danes, before the Brandenburg Germans, before the Portuguese, before any of them came, raping up people along the coast and murdering as they go. Putting a gun to one brother's head to make him help you fight the other brother and call him your ally when you write your false history book. What was the Akan people before they came? You know? Who were the Fulanis before the whites came, before the Arabs came? If we don't go back there, don't tell me anything about democracy. I live in what is supposed to be the bastion of democracy, and I've never been able to enjoy it or be protected by it or watch it at work. What I've seen in America is tyranny against African people for hundreds of years. Tyranny against the so-called native Asiatics who came before they came, because they weren't here first either. We were. And they practiced tyranny against us. And I do sympathize with what the whites have done to them. But they still would rather ally with the white genociders than with us, whose land they came on. History will make you think differently than you do now. I'm an African. It doesn't matter where I'm born in the world. Malcolm said, a cat had kittens. This is Mr. Malcolm X, Alhaji Malik El-Shabazz. He said, if a cat had kittens in an oven, they don't become biscuits. I'm not a biscuit. I'm an African. My mother wasn't a biscuit. My grandmother, who was a traditional priestess, was not a biscuit. They were born in North America, but they were Africans. My great-grandfather was born in Africa. My great-grandmother was born in Sierra Leone. My other great-grandmother was born in Nigeria. My other great-grandfather was born in what is now Rwanda and the Uganda area. There was no Rwanda or Uganda then. I know exactly where I come from. I know exactly who I am. I know my names. I got a bunch of them. But I only need to have one name. I'm an African. That's the only name I need. And if we're going to ever be free, yes, we got some mix-up minds. I woke some of them up about 10 years ago with a speech on 125th Street, and people are still spinning. And we got some wicked African minds over here, who we call African Americans, because our brains are so messed up. Do you know last year we killed 8,600 of our own people? That's how broken we are. That's how ignorant we are. 8,000 African Americans was killed last year, 8,600, by the hands of other African Americans. Because our minds are broken, our souls are broken, our culture is broken, our spirit is broken, our brain is ignorant on what the human being African is supposed to be. But we have many of the same things happening right there on the continent now. Every country I go to, the prisons are filled. And the persons we've committed the crimes against that have thrown us in the prison has been our own people. So what do? We have to, we can't just pour libations, so we're pouring libation to our ancestors. No, we better become those ancestors. Who were they? That's who I want to be. I want to be like them. I want to be like those ancestors I pour libation to. So I need to find out, who were they? What kind of human being were they? What kind of father were they? What kind of mother were they? What kind of son or daughter were my ancestors? That's who I want to be. And I got enough knowledge now through history to know who killed them, who robbed them, who abused them, who was their enemy, because those are the people who are now my enemies. And they can't come and play with me with words like democracy and parliamentary and government. Your crime-ridden societies is not something we should desire. But they got us desiring ice cream in a snowstorm. What do I need ice cream in a snowstorm when it's freezing for? But that's how stupid they are, and we are becoming as stupid as they are. I would like to have some ice cream if I'm walking down the street in a crowd because it's hot. And so some good ice cream will cool me off. That makes sense. But walking through a snowstorm in New York with an ice cream cone, does that make sense? But they make you make it make sense. So we sit and we say, I'm a Nigerian. You're a Liberian. You're a Ghanaian. I'm a Malian. I'm a Chadian. I'm a Cameroonian. That doesn't mean a damn thing. Because if it meant anything, we would be free. You wouldn't be, my beloved Dr. Tata, you wouldn't be in Germany. You'd be home in your heaven. Unless you just want to go on vacation and see other parts of the world. And that's a good thing. It's always good to travel and to learn. But why can't we be in our heaven? Why am I in America? People say, oh, you can buy a ticket and go back home. Yes, I can. But I'm forced now to be a soldier to fight. All my life, I'm fighting. So others can find their way back home. I got a business in Africa. I have a home in Africa. I have family in Africa. I could get on a plane and go and never look back here 1 second, any moment I want to. So, but I'm not the problem. What about all the people who are African Americans who are scared of Africa? Literally scared. Grown people, PhDs, master's degrees, teaching at universities, and they're afraid to go to Africa. We've got billionaires, millionaires, multimillionaires, and I don't think we have invested 1% in Africa. And we say, oh, we want to be free, we want to be free. But we won't get on a plane and go to Nigeria and invest in Nigeria, or invest in Zimbabwe, or invest in Namibia, or invest in South Africa. We said this white man is racist, he's abusive, he's still got us under oppression, but oh, please, Mr. White Man, can I invest in you? You know how much money we made last year and gave back to Arabs, Asians, and Europeans primarily? We spent a little with Africans and African Americans. Nearly $2 trillion. Do you know how much money that is? To squander with your enemy? Nearly $2 trillion. If we invested 1/3 of that in Africa, we can turn things around in multiple countries. But in our brain, we are so broken and shattered culturally that we worship our enemy's God. And our enemy's God said our gods are witches. Our gods are evil. So if our gods are evil and witches and criminals, then so were our ancestors. So then what does that make us? I walked away from my enemy's God decades ago. Because my enemy's gods wanted to kill my grandmother's God. And I love my grandmother too much. I must protect my grandmother's God. And we think it's cute to say which branch of the invading army's religion we belong to. Even I, when I was young, thought I was good. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rahman. I could speak their language and pray in their language better than they could. I could teach quarterly and catechism better than they could. It didn't do nothing to free me or my people. Freedom is being shackled to your identity, and your identity is Africa. And our ancestors worked out what our relationship to the universe and the divinity is. And we spit on it. That's why I make sure, you see that statue behind me? Every time I'm on any program, I make sure I have an image of an African symbol of the concept of divinity that should guide the development of our characters as human beings. Do you see African people seeking revenge against Europeans? We don't do that because we're human beings. With all the crime they've committed against us, we don't seek revenge on them. We welcome them to our table and in our houses. When we go to their countries, we try to fit in and do well. And yet nothing has changed on the exploitation of the African by the European capitals and the Asian capitals of the world. I'm tired of being robbed. I'm tired of being raped. I'm tired of being pedophile and molested and kidnapped. And then be handed the God of the killer, the God of the rapist, the God of the pedophile, the God of the robber, the God of the genocider. I'm at their feet worshiping. That doesn't make any kind of sense. Even the dumbest creature would know there's something wrong with that. I heard a young brother from Nigeria speaking a few days ago about the use of language. And he says, you know, when you go to the UN, the Chinese people are speaking Chinese. The Malaysian people are speaking Malaysian. The Germans are speaking German. The French are speaking French. The English is speaking English. We are speaking a foreign language. We dare not go and speak our Cameroonian language while at that podium. We're going to speak French. We dare not go and speak our Akan tree at the UN podium. We speak English. But the others speak in their mother tongue because they want to be attached to the soul and the spirit of their ancestors. We go and we speak in the enemy's town, so we attach to the soul and the spirit of our enemies. Sometimes I sound harsh. I'm not harsh. I'm a very loving, pleasant, good person, but I will defend the integrity of being African. And I've never done it for money. I have never needed anything in my life, but I've always been broke. But I've never needed for anything because those ancestors always took care of me. Those Orishas, those Obosun, those bush gods that you're scared of, they take care of me. They take care of my family. And people say, oh, aren't you scared? What am I going to be scared of? Malcolm X said, the secret to life is to have no fear. We'll all surrender this body one day because it'll wear out. It'll get old. But I'm not my body. This is simply a place I live. This is a shell. This is a house. This is a building. It's not me. I'm my ancestors, as they were their ancestors. And as one day my children and grandchildren would be me, their ancestor. And so I want to give them an ancestor that's alive, African, and clear thinking so they can improve upon me when their time comes to make that improvement. And they're already doing it for those who are old enough now. We've got to get involved in the local politics to make it practical. You can't sit back and let the party boys, because they got a degree from America or Britain or France, run for political office. You, the farmer, you, the artisan, you, the student, you have to run for political office if you want to take control of your governments without having to fight and kill each other in that way. Then you've got to participate in the political process. And yes, the others will try to block and stop you. as they've done. But you have to be clear, no, I can no longer let you wave your PhD around or your medical degree you got from a foreign school around, or the fact that you have a Fulbright scholarship from America, and so that qualifies you to lead me. No, what qualifies you to lead an African nation is to service the people who there, to become a servant of those people and do only what they collectively want done for their benefit.
Ashe.
And so well, I'm not we no more, I'm old, but you young people, it's your time. Stop being afraid. Stop running away from your country just to suffer over here in the West. I know what many of my African brothers and sisters go through when they move to this country. Everybody isn't lucky enough to get a scholarship and go to university and come out a lawyer or a doctor. Most people don't go through that. Most people suffer. Most people suffer the racism, the abuse, the misuse by men, the rape. If you're very unlucky to get sold into the sex trafficking, or working, driving a truck for nothing, the poor men are doing. And because people know you're not going to fight them because you're afraid to lose your green card, afraid of not getting one, you would take abuse that no one else would take from them. And then every 5 years or so, you buy up a bunch of goods and dress up and go home to show your great accomplishment while you hide your great pain. Let's face the truth. As Africans, what we have to suffer in the world, outside of our house, our Africa. If we do that, then no one will mess with us anywhere in the world. We'll be treated with the respect we deserve as human beings. But when you don't even have a nation to speak for you, then you have to submit to the cruelty of your enemies when you're in their nation. That has to stop. But it'll only stop if Africa gets strong enough to speak to the world and say, you do not abuse my children, whether you're in America, France, Brazil, Germany, England, or China. You do not abuse my nationals. You do not abuse my children, because I got gold and diamond and cobalt and coltan and all kinds of other things that say, I will stop you right here and now, and I will put sanctions on you as far as trade is concerned, and you will not make another penny of me that you treat my people in an appropriate manner. But where's that leader to say that? Where is he or she? I remember sitting at a lunch table at a university in America with a beautiful young leader who dared to say that. And I spoke with this young man, younger than me, and his name is Thomas Sankara. And in less than a year and a half, because he said those things even in the OAU meeting, the French and their puppets assassinated that child who came to service his people. Camaro, his murderer, sat on the other side of me. And every time I think of that, my skin crawls. That something didn't let me kill him there in that restaurant, so Sankara could deliver for his people what he had come to deliver. The other day, a friend from Ethiopia was very concerned because of the fighting. She's a sister. So she left the capital and went to visit an old friend in Namibia. And so she called me and said, she's at this friend. And I said, who's your friend? And he says, oh, the former president, President Nyomo. Well, I said, well, tell him Brother Small send his greeting, because we knew each other in our young revolutionary days. And when Nyomo needed help, he came and hid among us. And even the American FBI couldn't find him until he could go back home and lead his SWAPO. And the president looks good. He's still tall and upright. Like me, he's got his gray beard now. But you've had great warriors and great leaders. You better not lose them You better see who they were and learn from them. Immanuel Cabral, who was he? The average African or African American don't even know. What was PAIGC? This is the revolutionary organization of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verdes that drove the Portuguese into the sea under the leadership of Immanuel Cabral. Who was Cabral? What was ideas? What was his ideas? What did he leave us? And the one thing that he said and was clear about, no matter what political ideology you're talking about, you do not allow the loss of the culture of the African people. If your freedom movement isn't about sustaining and maintaining the culture of the African people, then that's not a freedom movement.
Ashe.
So that's where, if we're going to go anywhere in 2022, let's go black. You know, let's go back to black. Let's be Africans again. Doesn't matter what your complexion is, because I'm all browned up and Susan's all browned up. That's what war do to you. But our minds should stay black up. You know, we take our minds back to black, to be Africans again, so we can give them more again and hope they do better. We Africans gave the world Christianity, not that model that they brought back to us, but the foundation of that model we gave to the world. We, the African, gave the world the Hebrew tradition. We, the African, gave the world the Muslim tradition. And how dare they come back to us with their sword and their guns, murder us by the millions, take our land and our children and abuse us the way they have in these almost 2,000 years. Then give us the bastardized form of the very spiritual system we gave them to save them from the caves they crawled out of. And stop lying to yourself about who they are. Civilization is not a building and a paved street. You rob enough people, you can build a big building and a paved street. Civilization is the protection of the people who walk down those streets and use the building. The most civilized thing a person could do is value the life of the person standing next to them as much as he should have valued his or her life. That's the African tradition. And every time we practice it, they chop our hands off. So now we have to learn enough from history so we can have the protection when they try to take our hands. We can take theirs first and says, that's a bad habit that you'll never do again. And others will learn from that. We have enough information. We don't have to write another book on African culture, written by Africans, that fill the libraries of the schools and the universities in Africa and much of the rest of the world. If we go into all the museums in America and take the African things out, they could put most of this American junk in one museum. If you go to England and take everything African out, or Belgium, or France, or Germany, they can put what's left of their culture in one museum. And we know that, those of us who've traveled abroad and those of us who've been studying. And yet we act like we are the nobodies when we are the everybody. We are the African, God's first creation. Everybody comes from you. That's a scientific fact that no one can dispute. We built the first civilizations. Everybody agrees with that. No one can dispute except the fools and the ignorant. We are the first scientists and mathematicians. No one can refute that because they save all our material in the museum, thank God. But it would have been better at home saved by us. We were saving them very well before we got robbed. But let 2022 be a time when we make a determination that we will make sure that every African woman, child, and man will have the food, the clothing, the shelter, and the security they deserve wherever they live in the world. We've got enough wealth to ensure that. We've got enough educated and skilled and tooled people to ensure that. We simply have to get the African mind so that we use our tools and our education to ensure that. We have the wealth in the earth where we live to ensure that. That we can have a bathroom with a good sewage disposal system. We've got the wealth and the technology to ensure that. That we have fresh running waters. We know how to dig a hole in the ground and put a pipe in the ground to ensure that. That's what we should be thinking about. You know? Now, who's going to make the next rap music? Because rap music may sound good, but it helped destroy the very socialization process that was saving the Black youth in America during the 60s and the 70s. And then our enemy took our own music coming from our own children and turned it into an enemy. Where our mothers were called the B words. And our brothers killed each other over stupidity like a lyrics in a song. And then wanted to stand up in the world and raise their hand that they're famous. That's an animal. That's not a human being. Don't imitate that. There were others of us who didn't do that. Right here in this America. We played our African music. We call them blues and jazz and hip hop and bebop and spirituals and rag. And we didn't sell heroin and coke and crack that killed more than 1 million of our people. Less than 2% did that. The rest of us was either fighting against it or running from it. So don't look to imitate the filthy part of the African American that was forced on him by the white American with his money and his power. There's more to us than that. Study our history. We fought for freedom for 400 years nonstop. Study the history of the leaders of Malawi going back to the 1800s. And guess what? The leaders of Malawi and the leaders of the ANC and the PAC and the leaders of Zimbabwe were friends with African Americans ever since the 1800s. We were calling ourselves Pan-Africanists. Many of them came and studied at Tuskegee with Booker T. Washington. Many of them tutored under W.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. Because they knew they were one Africa. And one African, even back then. We've lost our way now. Everybody's fighting now for white people's approval of how intellectual we can be and how much of his associations we can belong to and how much awards we can get while our children suffer, both in America, in Jamaica, in Brazil, and in Africa. We suffer in the UK. You go down to Brixton and see if you're going to find a paradise there. You know? We suffer in Germany. There's some of us that are doing well in Germany, but Germany have its black slums, its black ghetto, and treat us like trash. We suffer in France. We suffer in Italy. You know? So 2022 should be about loving Africa, loving self, learning the history of this continent, learning the history of the Africans who went abroad. Let's stop blaming each other for things we didn't even do. You know, I remember I resented when I first came to Africa and one of the beautiful kings, chiefs, apologized for slavery that he had nothing to do with. But he felt that this is a way to tell our brothers in the diaspora is hurting, you can be welcome back home. Mm-hmm. No, let's tell each other the truth. Somebody came up on our shores with big ships, with cannons and cannons and cannons, with big cannonballs. And they fired them at us. And they came ashore with their muskets and their rifles and their swords, and they used them against us. We were fishermen and we were farmers and hunters. We were not warriors and soldiers. Stop using that term. Our ancestors were warriors. No, they weren't. They were human beings who farmed their land and fished the river and hunt for food and build villages and build cities and taught their children how to read and write. The other myth that Africans didn't read and write. We had some of the biggest library in the world before Europe had its first library. We could start in the Mali Kingdom with Sankore, University of Sankore. In the 12th century, we were selling books to Europe. They didn't know what books were. This is history. Read the work of, what's his name? Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun. His book is called The Philosophy of History, and a number of others. But just learn who you are. Love who your ancestors were. And let's build for the future. Food, clothing, shelter, safety. We got the money to provide it. We make enough money. Just under the present condition, how can African Americans spend $2 trillion last year and say they got poverty? There's something wrong with who you're spending your money with and what you're spending your money on. And who are you investing your money with? No one, no group. We're about 45, maybe 50 million here, right? $2 trillion and we got poverty? Does that make any sense? There's nothing logical about that, except the stupidity of where you spend your money, with whom you spend your money, and where you invest that money. Susan shouldn't be here running trailers asking for donation. We've got millionaires who can put $10 million into the enterprise of the Daily Pan-African TV and never miss a penny of it. If their minds were right, if their consciousness was clear, if the body of knowledge about Africa that they hear comes from our ancestors' schools of thought, you know. How's somebody going to come to your enemy, going to come to your country and says, oh, what you worship is superstitions. That's juju. And we run, oh, we stay away from the juju. Oh, the juju is going to hurt me. Well, if the juju is going to hurt you, why didn't we use it to hurt the invaders? If that's what juju does. If I can poison you by going in a little corner and pouring this or that, why don't I do that and eliminate the people who are holding the Francophone states hostage with a contract while they got the guns of the French Foreign Legion to the back of their head, and the black collaborators who've been trained in Paris and America running the parliaments? Then let's go do some juju. But let's not make no mistake. There is power in our indigenous tradition, but you have to practice it to be able to implement the power. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to the village and I'm going to see Nana and he's going to give me something and you're going to bring some powder back and sprinkle. That's not how it works. Physics started in Africa. Chemistry started in Africa. Biology started in Africa. Surgery started in Africa. That's our religion. That's our sacred science. We knew ecology. We knew cosmology. We knew how nature worked. I'm looking at my beautiful sister, Dr. Tata. She's gorgeous today, isn't she? But she's made up of the dirt of the earth. The dirt. That dirt, that earth. And so am I. It grows, and we call it plants. But where does the plant get its nutrients? It absorbs earth. When we eat the plants, we're eating earth. If we eat animals, those animals ate the plant, which came from earth. Do you understand what I'm saying? Simple, common
Yes.
sense science. Okay? I'm made up of earth. I'm made up of light, energy, sunlight, moonlight, planet lights, and I'm made up of water, hydrogen, and oxygen. And so are you. But it's configured in such a way that it allows for this animation, both consciously and subconsciously, to take place and maneuver in the world. That's basic African science. Study any of our systems. That's basic African science. Uya in the Yoruba represents the wind. That represents philosophically change. You know, that represents guardianship. It says, oh, Oya's main job is to sit at the gate to the cemetery. That means she's the custodian of ancestral wisdom. Study your system. You'd be shocked. Harvard got nothing on the average African village. Let me say that to you again. Harvard, Yale, Cambridge got nothing on the wisdom and knowledge of the average African village if you just begin to learn it, study it, and practice it again. Then you'll see why they have to force you to be down. Our ancestors gave the world what you're calling science, especially the basics, the physics, chemistry, biology, the arithmetic or mathematics. Everything else is the servant of those 5 pieces. And that came from our minds because we are made up of everything in the universe. We made up of the water, we made up of the light, we made up of the soil. You know? We ingested the air, but that means we're ingesting the gases. We ingested the food, that's the minerals from the earth. Okay? We ingested the energy, that's the fire. You know, earth, what is called earth, water, fire, and what else? The gases or the air. That's who we are. Ancestors understood that. Go back and read books in ancient Egypt. But ancient Egypt is the only place that left books. Tens of thousands of books makes up the libraries of Mali. Do you know the whites are stealing those books, those papyrus, and taking it to Europe? Just like they're stolen our Benin art and other art. Even today, that Mali have one of the oldest ancient libraries in the world. So ECOWAS, what are you doing to preserve that Malian library from Timbuktu University, which was there before there was a single university in Europe or America? Wake up, African people, in 2022. Become who you really are. Get the knowledge the ancestors have left you and put it to work for your own survival. You shouldn't have to leave your country, leave your home, go abroad among strangers and suffer all kinds of abuse to make a few dollars, to bring back home, or to send back home, to provide food, clothing, and shelter. We should be able to do that in our lands, in our home country. As we fight to remove these borders that block us, because none of these countries are real African countries. These are European constructs that we've been forced into after so-called colonialism has ended. But colonialism hasn't ended. You know, Kwame Nkrumah left us the most beautiful book. It's called Neo-Colonialism, the New Colonialism. Everyone should buy Kwame Nkrumah's Neo-Colonialism and read that book. And our monies that we're making abroad, I see someone is being clear that we must invest in our freedom as a people. Many lives lost unnecessarily, and we still holding court. Must come to a verdict now, and I agree. And the verdict is that we're now going to take control of the running of Africa. And we're going to do it without murdering one another for one foreign adversary or another. We're going to fight to take control of those governments on the village level. We're going to go sit at the feet of some of the chiefs instead of laughing at them.
Mm.
So that's what
Ashe.
we do. We laugh at them, go sit at their feet and say, oh, Nana, oh, Baba, teach me what you know. Go with
Mm.
the recorder. You can
Ashe.
download a tape recorder on every phone there is, so you don't have to say, oh, I can't find a tape recorder. Download the app to your phone and sit at the feet of the great minds that's in every village in Africa. Don't fool you because his cloth is raggedy, because his sandal is broken, and his feet is ashy, and maybe he couldn't go to the barber that day. You sit with that mind. I've learned so much. Most of what I've learned is not in anybody's university because I have no doctorate. I have a doctorate, but that doesn't mean anything to me. I have nobody's master's. And the bachelor's they gave me is because I was such a militant. They were scared to death to get me out of the college. They graduated me. They really did. They just gives a gift. Just get them out of here, and they graduated me. But I sit at the feet of Nana Puasa, God bless her soul, who died at 101 in Kumasi. Bafo Okotu, who wasn't the most loved man in parts of Ghana, but he was linguist to two Santa Hennies. I sat at his feet. I've sit at the feet of those who walk with Niamugi Gamancha, who is the king of the Ga people. He's my younger brother, but he's really my big brother, Nana Kwamina and Ketsia, the fifth of Esukado, you know. And my Omenhen, Nana Sapan of Agogo, where there I'm Nana Kofi Mpansa, the second. And then in Latte, many of my friends and some family is there now in Ghana celebrating the Asurjabi festival for the last 7 days. They didn't care nothing about this COVID. They got on a plane and they went to Ghana to participate in that ceremony. You know, there's all these shrine houses and schools in Africa and every nation state, every ethnic area where our tradition is alive and well and being practiced.
Ashe.
And we need to go learn. No, they're not in the university where you can go enroll, but you can walk into a village and you can ask to speak to the chief priest or priestess. And you tell them why you're there. And if they discern that you are honest and sincere, they will teach you. They will teach you. When I have an illness in my body, I pick up my telephone and I call Haji. And he'll say, who do you know coming to America in the next week or 2 weeks? And my medicine will come, not from CVS. Okay. So we need to turn ourselves around and look at what we got before it's all gone. They can only hold on but so long. I remember going into Uganda, 94. I was actually in Uganda when the massacre took place, the genocide in Rwanda. I was actually having lunch with Paul Kagame at that time, me and my friends. But before we met with Paul and the others, I went to the tomb of the Kabakas. You know, the Kabakas are the kings of the Bakongo people. What? And I don't know why they chose me. There were some of my other friends who had come to the conference. They were shushing them out, throwing them out of the shrine when I walked up. And somebody came and says, oh, they want you. You come. And they sat me down. And they talked to me about their history. And they talked to me about each of the Kabakas. And they talked to me about how they buried their dead. And they talked to me about the wisdom of the ancestors. Then they took me to the village where there was this priest who did my reading for me, which I can't tell you what I was told, but he did a reading which was on point. But when I walked into the yards, I recognized many of the deity symbols or the symbols of the forces of nature They were the same as the ones I studied in Ghana and Nigeria. And I go, like, our system is universal. It's one. It's all over Africa. The same system in Cameroon. They may call Oya by a different name, or Eshu Legba by a different name, or Ogun by a different name. But they're talking about the same force of nature, the same principles of physics that we call Orisha. Those that we call Orishas are principles of physics. Some are, how do you say, formulas of chemistry. And we're playing with them, laughing at them, looking at a dead person on a cross and saying it's going to help us, and our condition gets worse and worse and worse by the millions we praying to the same enemy's symbols of reality, while our conditions get worse and worse and worse. Come on, even common sense will say stop. Stop. The only person you owe anything to is the universe itself. The universe itself. Because that's who you are. You're a manifestation and a display of an aspect of the essence of the universe itself. And our ancestors knew that. And they concocted science explanations for that. That's called our ancient culture. And until we return back to that, we will be perpetual slaves of our enemy's oppressive culture. It is as simple as that. So 2022 should be a time to turn around, and walk backwards into the house of your ancestors and ask them for guidance with their wisdom. Go to the village. Stay in the hut where you got to go and get that water from the one well or the one pump or even the river for a few days. I know we're used to the nice shower and the whole deal, but go to where the people are still human beings, where they're still natural God beings. And if you think I'm wrong saying God beings, look at our language system. Especially when you look at the system we call the Bantu system. Every word that represents people, person, place, or thing has as its prefix or suffix their word for God. That should tell you something. That should tell you that they understood something very clearly. So let's stop faking it. We're going to be African? Let's be African. In our words, in our deeds, in our thoughts, in our behavior, in our habits, no matter what the cost is. And I guarantee you, the cost will get minimal and minimal and minimal as you get close to being the African we were born to be.
I share.
So, Sister Susan, I'll just come hanging out with you, and you always tell me, speak your own truth, but the truth is simple and it is constantly repetitive no matter how much we say it. It is to be African or not to be at all for us. If we want to say, I am, I exist, then that has to be as an African. Anything else is a clone or an aberration of somebody else, a hologram of someone else. If you want to be a real living being, the African must agree with themselves, within themselves, that I'm going to be an African, and I will find out how to be that no matter what the cost. Because only an African can rebuild Africa for Africans in the way we want to see it, starting in the 22nd century of this 22nd century or 21st century, whatever it is. So I'm glad to be back on Pan-African Daily TV. I'm still trying to get over, when you get sick and you're down, it takes a lot out of your body and a lot out of your energy system. And then you have to build that back again, So I'm still trying to restore myself, because I had a knee replacement. And it wasn't just cutting and putting some little fix it. They took the knee my mother gave me and they cut it off with a saw and threw it in the garbage can, you know? And they gave me a metal knee and put it inside of me and sewed me back up. So I'm learning how to use this knee made out of titanium, which came from Africa, thank God, and porcelain, which makes up my kneecap, and plastic, which makes up my new meniscus. So that's what the struggle is. I can walk very well, not as strong as I want to. I can drive a car again. I can walk up steps, something I couldn't do for years. So it's a big advantage, but it takes healing. It's a process. I'm into the 4th month. They said it takes about 8 months to a year to really, for your whole body to come back together, not just the physical body. But when something is taken out of you, it disrupts your spiritual energy flow as well. And all of that has to redirect. The nervous system has to redirect and restore. And so that's what I'm trying to do. But 2022 is going to see me trying to be more of an African than I was in 2021. Okay? That's what. So, Sister Tata, it's on you.